Hi, this is Michael Pilarski. I'm from the Global Earth Repair Foundation and also Friends of the Tree Society since 1978. And today I want to give a short video on the topic of how you can contribute to global ecosystem restoration in your own yard. So this is a discussion on your yard or your friend's yard. This is for the world. Most of us live in places that have yards. Some have small yards, some have big yards, and all different kinds of climates in the world, etc. But here are some general ideas on how your yard can contribute to global ecosystem restoration. Now, the information I'm about to deliver comes from my permaculture design courses that I've taught for since 1988, and I always have talks on permaculture applied to the yard. So this is slightly different, though. This is really looking at ecosystem restoration and good permaculture design for yards. Now, to start with, we can add more native plants into our yards. A lot of people don't have any or very few native plants, unless they have perhaps a wild jungle there. And so we can gradually add more native plants over time. Now, this doesn't mean you have to give up food or ornamentals. You can come up with a list of native plants that provide food if you're after vegetables or fruits, whatever you want in your yard. If you're trying to grow medicines or craft supplies, let's say natural dyes or something to make baskets or craft items. So this can be a productive landscape in your yard. The goal is productive, both in terms of products people can use if they so choose, but also serve functions. So it's real important for a lot of people to have really beautiful yards, that they're aesthetic, they will please the neighbors, they may have codes to live up to. So you can have a very fine set of an ornamental yard with lots of color and also lots of fragrance, using native plants and a mixture of native and non-native. Now, you also want the functions of the plants. So a lot of times plants can provide, we want trees for shade. We may want to screen out on views that we don't want of streets or neighbors, so we need little hedges and view screens. We may wish to help the house reduce its cooling and heating bills by the judicious placement of trees and shrubs and vines around the house. So there's all these functions as well as products. The native plants can be picked to be pollinator friendly, that they're useful for pollinating bees, native bees, butterflies. They can provide food for birds, habitat, nesting area, nesting material. You could take a corner of your yard, just let's say a corner, and make it sort of a real wild area with maybe some hawthorns for nesting areas and food. And so it's a wild area, predominantly native plants. And let's say the three neighbors whose corners you were adjoined with would make a little wild corner of their yard. You would all of a sudden have a much bigger, sort of like you might say, your own nature preserve or habitat right in your yard. So so that's a little bit about the plants. Another thing that we want to do on a site is to sequester carbon. How much carbon can you sequester on your yard? And this can be quite substantial. Let's take the topic of hugulkulturs, which is using woody debris, tree trunks or limbs or old firewood, old boards, non-treated, what have you, yard trimmings and waste from tree trimming or hedge trimming, yard waste. All that can go into these hugulkultur beds, a raised bed. You have to I'm not going to go into the whole talk about hugulkulturs here. I have a lot of talks on hugulkulturs on video. But the more hugulkulturs you build on your property, the higher the amount of carbon sequestration you have. You build your soil, you want to have very productive soil with high organic matter content. There's carbon sequestration. You might want to create snags in your yard. If you have enough trees in your yard, not everybody does, But if you have enough trees in your yard, you could ring bark one of them and kill it, and to get a dead snag. We need more snags in our urban landscapes. They're a good ecological feature. It's a form of carbon sequestration. So creating snags in your yard, down logs and large woody debris. I'm reminded of my friend Larry Williams in Bellingham, Washington, bless his soul. But he's still alive, by the way. But he collects stumps and plants them in his yard, and there are different ecosystem restoration jobs that he does. So he's a landscaper, but he uses stumps. I mean, we're talking big stumps sometimes. You know, something you have to hire a large truck to haul around. I had another friend named Robert, or I have another friend, Albert Postema of Earthwise Excavation in Snohomish. And so he has a big excavation business, dump trucks, large excavators. He does, there's a lot of tree removal and stump removal in his line of work. And he stockpiled tree stumps for years until he was able to make probably one of the largest hugulkulturs ever built. It's like 12 foot tall, 30 feet wide at the base, and hundreds of feet long, huge amounts of material. And so basically, most people don't have that size of yards as Albert, but just think, the large woody biomass is something in short supply, or there's not enough of it in urban landscapes. Can you fit some into your yard? Here in the Northwest, we see people digging out giant old growth stumps and then transporting them via flat bed to their property, and a crane hoists it off and plumps it down in the front yard, and they sort of bury it in there. So they have this large old growth stump in their yard. People go to extreme lengths. Now that is carbon sequestration, folks. So you don't have to go to that length. But how can you get more carbon? If you didn't have enough carbon from your own yard waste, you could set up a little carbon drop-off spot for your neighbors. You know, neighbors that have extra material they don't know how to use. They can drop it off, and you have a corner of your yard, perhaps off an alley, in an area with nicely labeled areas. You know, lawn clippings, wood waste, tree trimmings, etc. And then you could use them, or you could actually set up a depot. Every urban area could use a little woody debris depot that the neighborhood can use. So set one up for your area. So there's a lot of woody debris in the urban or municipal waste streams. How can you get your hands on some of it, and how can you utilize it? Okay, carbon sequestration. So then another one is, how can you maximize water infiltration capture on your site? So you want to capture and infiltrate water into your site to replenish underground reservoirs and reestablish a good hydrological cycle. So every yard has a certain amount of rainfall on it every year. Does your yard ever discharge rainwater during the heaviest rainstorms, and where? How can you capture that flow? Rooftop catchment is something that more and more people could use. They capture the water. They can use it to irrigate the yard. They don't have as big a water bill from the municipal water system. Some parts of the world, people actually use roof catchment for drinking, and they have various purification systems to do that. So capture roof water, capture runoff from sidewalks and driveways. Particularly if you have a sloping driveway, you can put a grate at the bottom of it to capture that flow, run it into a swale or a small pond or a marsh ecosystem. So capture the water, sink it on site. Do you have water running off along the street where you live? Can you do a curb cut? They're called curb cuts, where you cut out part of the curb and divert the water into a little small swale or rain garden on your site. So rain gardens is one of the main ways we infiltrate water into sites, and there's more and more books and information on rain gardens these days. We could create food forest, urban food forest. Now we're starting to get off the yard, but kind of still at the yard scale. Urban food forest or small restoration projects at the local level. That's going a bit beyond yard, but it's sort of like the next step out. You could set up a study group for urban ecosystem restoration in your neighborhood and get other people to talk about it. Set up a small ecosystem restoration group if there isn't one already. so we can organize ourselves, because it's a big job, folks, to restore the global ecosystem, and we all can put our shoulder to the wheel in some ways, and one of the ways is in our own yards. And the goal of this is that everybody's life will be more pleasant. Their yards will be a more pleasant place to live. They'll have more tasty things to eat. They'll be happier. And they'll also have contributed to the global ecosystem restoration. So there's a few thoughts for you folks. There's, of course, we can go a lot more in depth into all these things. This could become more, it could be a whole training system, or there's various books we could recommend that are into this topic. So this is just the opening little talk. So I hope to come back and talk more about resources for ecosystem restoration in your yards. So thank you for listening. Go out and be part of the global ecosystem restoration movement. Thank you so much.